Good morning. This is such an historic day as we stop and reflect on our 100th anniversary of suffrage and our right and obligation to vote in this country. And as we stop and honor those women who really fought for the rights with our women of color sisters in those days, it is time that we look at what we are doing as women, both in the workforce and the marketplace, to really drive change as change leaders. And nothing is more important than stopping to support one another as we galvanize change. Women's Business Collaborative is so fortunate to have 41 partner organizations. And together, we say it's faster together because we'll never change the workforce, the number of women on boards, the number of entrepreneurs that are excelling, and our sisters of women in color and parity without doing it together. So today, the Network of Executive Women, NEW, is focusing this panel on leading your team, a culture and business model into the future in these turbulent times. So let's talk about NEW. It's extraordinary with their growth. 13,000 professional women have joined NEW. 925 companies across North America, 150 regional events, 22 regional groups, and a collective voice of business women with the workforce and the executive women, and a whole focus on moving up women in the workforce and a focus on women of color as never before. So Sarah Alter, it's incredible. You've only been at NEW as the CEO for just a little over 2 years. Yeah. And what change you have made in your leadership and your collaboration and your growth. So we salute you, Sarah Alter. And today, as you hear from Deloitte and Lowe's and Valassis, what an extraordinary panel you've got, and how you are impacting us as change leaders, moving together to drive results, because now we say it's not verbiage, it's action and accountability as we move forward together. Thank you, Sarah Alter. Thank you, NEW, for being a partner of WBC. Sarah Alter.
Edie, thank you for such a warm welcome. And we are thrilled to be a part of WBC. Our missions are clearly aligned, right? We are here to advance all women in the workplace. Excited today to be joined by an incredible group of thought leaders and partners, all of them partners with NEW. And, and as you shared, hey, we've been through some rather turbulent times, right? We've had literally a trifecta of turbulent dynamics at play. We have COVID, right? We've seen heightened awareness now and prioritization being placed on racial injustice, and we've got political polarization. We're not going to talk about the last one, but we're clearly going to talk about the first two dynamics at play and how, we as leaders now, and particularly the female leaders, have to play such a key and pivotal role in helping to transform our organizations into the future. And being faced with so much turbulence and so much uncertainty, it's no easy task. But I think everybody's going to walk away from this conversation today enlightened, because we've got three incredible women who are going to be leading this conversation. And I'm going to make sure I want to do their titles justice, because you'll see just how high-powered and successful and impactful they are. First, we're joined by Kimberly Betts, And Kimberly is the Managing Director of Human Capital, Retail and Consumer Products, Global Consumer, Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion Leader. Kimberly, I don't know what else there is that you should be focusing on, because I think you're going to change the world just in itself. Then we're also joined by the incredible Janice Little, Executive Vice President of Human Resources at Lowe's. And then last but not least, Susan Rothwell, Chief Revenue Officer of Valassis. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Kimberly.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and I'm thrilled to be here. Edie, I don't know if you were aware, as I'm one of the early new builders 20 years ago when we had this idea that we wanted to build this network. And there was a handful of us and calling and trying to find sponsorship from some of our key sponsor companies that are still sponsors today of New. Incredibly proud of the work that New has done and under your leadership, Sarah. And the alliance with WBC is clearly a value add alliance. So really appreciate all that partnership. As Sarah mentioned, we're going to spend some time today. I'm really excited. It's been a pleasure getting to know Janice and Susan a bit better. I know Sarah quite well, and getting to know you, Edie, as we've been preparing for this discussion. And we're going to talk about what's happening in the environment around how we think about the future of work and how we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as those two things are really coming together at a critical intersection at this particular point in time, at this moment in time. And so, as we know, I'll just make a couple of remarks about how we're thinking about this at Deloitte, and then really want to get into the conversation and ask Janice and Susan and Sarah some questions and sort of bounce it back and forth. And the format here is pretty informal. We're a pretty friendly group, so really looking forward to tossing it back and forth. As we've talked about, and as Edie mentioned, these are turbulent times and they're unprecedented times. At Deloitte, we've spent a lot of time for a number of years now talking about the future of work, and what we find ourselves, the situation we find ourselves in at the moment, is that we've truly been shot out of a cannon into the future, back to the future, if I can coin a term, where things that we thought were going to take decades have taken days, weeks, and months. And so one of the things that has become really clear is the power of our organizations and our leaders to really support all of our associates and employees in pivoting toward that future. One of the things that we do at Deloitte, we've done for 10 years actually, is a study that we call the Human Capital Trends Report. And this year was our 10th anniversary of doing that study, and a couple things have risen to the top. And this is sort of pre and mid-pandemic, if you will. Everything is mid-pandemic, post-pandemic. I don't know when there'll be a post-pandemic. I don't think anybody knows. But some of the trends that we've seen that really have risen to the top, which were forces in play even before COVID became a factor in our environment. And we have 10 top trends, but I'm going to highlight 3 of them and talk about them related to the future of work. One trend being the whole idea of belonging, and how can organizations help associates and customers, by the way. When you I work in the retail and consumer products industry, so spend a lot of time focusing and talking about customers. When a customer walks into a store, or when a customer has a digital experience with your brand, how are they feeling a sense of inclusion? How are they feeling like they belong? When associates are spending time serving customers, how do they feel like they're part of a larger purpose, which is attached to the mission of the organization? So that sense of belonging is an incredibly important thing for organizations to focus on. The second trend I wanted to highlight was this notion of well-being. And I think we're really feeling this right now, where for many of us, if you're not in a store, distribution center, factory, or some other on-site location for your work, you've had to become virtual overnight. And the whole notion of how do we maintain a sense of well-being, and as organizations, how do we create well-being as it pertains to what people do for work, their workplace and their skills from a workforce perspective. And that's really the structure by which we think about the future of work, workforce, and workplace. And the workplace, of course, is very tangible to all of us right now who are spending time in different physical locations. But how, again, from a well-being standpoint, how do we think about incorporating concepts of well-being into what people do for work, and then whether it's a digital environment or a physical environment that they're spending their time in. And then the third trend being around this whole notion of reskilling. How are we helping organizations as well as associates have the skills that they're going to need? And those skills, like everything else in our environment, have accelerated in their evolution. What we thought were critical skills 6 months ago are very different from what we see them being now. And they're going to continue to evolve, by the way, as this particular environmental factor called COVID-19 continues to travel throughout our environment, and as organizations become more digitally connected and more digitally enabled. So that's another topic that comes up on our human capital trends. And as I mentioned, we think about work, workforce, and workplace, those three dynamic factors as it pertains to the future of work. And then there's this intersection, which, as someone who's never seen this kind of momentum in my lifetime, this intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion, where what has happened in the last few months around this topic has changed us forever, right? I think about, I wasn't old enough to remember the civil rights movement in the 60s. But when you think about a movement, you think about the moment in time that we currently have that we're sitting at the doorstep of. It's akin to the kind of time that we had the opportunity to take advantage of in the civil rights era. So these things come together and really create a ton of opportunity. So that's really excited to have this conversation today. I'm going to ask some questions. And we're, like I said, we're going to sort of toss it back and forth. And as you know, as I also mentioned, the environment that we're in continues to accelerate. It's continuing to get accelerated by the pandemic, technology, which has tried to stay ahead of the pandemic to try to help people cope with the environment that we're in, and of course, public policy, and we're on the doorstep of a major election. And so all of those things in our environment are creating, we were talking about this earlier, creating this sense of instability and anxiety. And so the more that organizations can create a sense of belonging, a sense of attachment, connection, a sense of stability for associates, the more important. And how we lead our organizations through that will continue to become more and more important. So without further ado, I wanted to start asking some questions, and we can sort of kick it back and forth as we mentioned. The first question around the topic of the future of work, I wanted to sort of get out there. For you, Janice, I'm looking to you maybe to lead off this discussion. As you think about COVID and how COVID has continued to sort of move and evolve, how has it affected work from your perspective? You know, I know, of course, Lowe's is in a very specific industry, but I'm sure you're having lots of conversations with companies and organizations you partner with that are experiencing very similar, but in some cases, different kinds of impacts. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you see that impact playing out right now.
Thank you, Kimberly. First, I just want to say I'm so delighted to be a part of this conversation. I'm so delighted to represent our 300,000 strong associates around the country and those that have been on the front lines right in the very beginning as an essential retailer. We have basically seen it all, I think. I hope we have, is what I would say to that, because then I feel like if we've seen it all, then we have a chance to know how to respond should things shift again. I think we have a good handle on it, but you never know, because this pandemic has just served us up so many interesting aspects. But I will tell you the number one things I'll tell you a couple of things, but the number one thing that came to mind for us as a company when the pandemic hit was safety of our associates. and our customers, right? So our stores are open. When our stores were declared essential, we were declared an essential retailer, our associates on the front line. So our first thing was, how do we protect them? And there's a lot of things that were transforming. It wasn't clear on, do you wear masks? Do you not wear masks? Is everybody expected to wear masks? How do you socially distance in a store? How do you deal with that as a cash register when, you know, you're pretty right up to close, or you're asking an associate to help you if you're a customer to find something. And then in the midst of all of this, we started to realize that we needed to jump on it really quick. So I would tell you, being agile and flexible was our second thing, is how do we solve this? So what I'm super proud about what we've done is we put a command center together immediately when this hit, and every decision was coming from the center out. And that was really powerful because our people were not trying to localize anything. It was very clear from the guidance. They were having a lot of input in from the local areas, but then we actually triaged it out and brought it to a clear answer across the network, and it was very consistent. And that allowed us to be incredibly nimble and agile. The other thing is, I would tell you, our government relations team was on point. They were very clear what was happening in local, state, any kind of impacts of how laws were starting to shape or expectations were starting to shape. They were an integral part of this command center that guided us throughout this pandemic. But I will tell you, some of the things that I think has transformed us and how we think about things is our culture. So Lowe's is in the midst of a transformation. You know, Marvin Ellison joined us in July of 2018 to transform this company to greatness. So we're super excited that he's here, his leadership team that he's brought together. I'm the newest member of that team. But what's really powerful is our culture. You know, when you're bringing organizations together to try to move it forward, there's always tension. And what happened is we didn't have as much time. And then COVID, again, didn't serve us up as much time to build relationships. But I will tell you, sitting back and watching how this command center and how we triage together as an organization, it was pretty powerful to see how everyone started to learn to rely on each other and that dependency. That's really important when you try to shape a culture to move forward, right? So we had to figure out, how do you recreate that in a remote environment? We sent our associates in the corporate offices home on March 17th. We said, grab your stuff. We think this is going to last a couple of weeks and we'll get back to you. We didn't know whether our technology was all going to work. We didn't know whether people had internet at home. We had so many things that we didn't know, but we knew we had to keep them safe because that was our number one thing. And then what I just love that happened is the relationship building, the reliance on each other, the commitment to making sure we did this as well as we possibly could, just started to shine. And it's really, you see the commercials about safety for Lowe's. It's not something new to us. It's what we've always done. We know how to do that, but we had to do it for a remote team. So a quick couple of things, and then I'll pass it on, is we had to make very quick decisions. So again, we made a very centralized team called the task force to focus in on how we were going to deal with remote working and how we were going to deal with safety through our stores and inside our buildings whenever we return to work. So we have a whole return to work strategy that we built so that our folks know we're phasing it just like every other company. We're delaying when we realize the pandemic is serving more positive cases. So we're just going to protect our associates. And I think the final thing is that what we did to kind of keep mental health was a big deal. You talked about that, Kimberly, is we have these weekly tip sheets that we send out every single week to our remote associates so that they have we have a whole SharePoint built on how to manage through COVID working remote. When we realized that we have a large majority of our associates and customers that come into our stores that are deaf and hard of hearing, you think about it, we're wearing masks today. Mm-hmm. How do they see if they're a lip reader? How do they understand how to engage? So we were, with masks, you all of a sudden separated an entire group of people that we've been trying to work so hard to include them. So our diversity team came up with and worked with a partner to find the mask with the clear face so that we can start to distribute those not only in our corporate office for the few people we have here, but we piloted in our stores. And we've started to receive really, really great feedback from customers and associates around the country in terms of how that's helped. So those are some of the little things we've been doing throughout, but we've been keeping safety first is our number one priority.
Let's talk about innovation on the go. That's really an interesting way to think about it. Thank you, Janice. Susan and Sarah, any additional thoughts from either one of you ladies on sort of what you've seen in terms of the response and how you've seen it impact your organization?
Yeah, so I would say we did some very similar things, right? Having that central point of decision making, so everybody clearly understood, what we were dealing with and what the thought process was. And you really need to have that strong leadership, right? Especially when there's a lot of conflicting information and thought processes and things like that. I think one of the other things, because we have a production facility, so we did the same thing. Our corporate people went home, everybody went remotely. Went like crazy to get Zoom and making sure everybody was active on Zoom. But we also had production facilities that were still working as an essential workforce. And so one of the things I think that we really did that was really great was everybody in the company rallied around, and we sent gift baskets and notes and letters of thanks to let them know how much we appreciated them, during this time, putting themselves and their health at risk, right? Not leaving the comforts of their home to get to the facilities to distribute our packages for our customers that are important, to our grocers and our CPG clients and things like that. So I think that really helped with morale, and then it really helped, make us be one company, even though some people were home and some people were out working in production facilities.
And that, also really interesting set of innovations. You mentioned, Susan, sending we call them moments that matter at Deloitte, yes, where we seize an opportunity to catch someone doing something right and doing something that's really beneficial to other associates. This idea of thinking about them and sharing gift baskets and things like that. We know, and we spend a lot of time talking with clients about this, that your employees, from an employment brand perspective, are watching what you're doing during this particular time. And yes, the economy is very volatile, and jobs are fluctuating and skills are changing and a lot of things are moving. But as we continue down this path of competing for talent, and really needing to bring the best and the brightest into each of our organizations, what you're doing now has a long shelf life. People will remember, and they'll also remember from a customer branding standpoint, which is something that, that we're finding out as well. Customers remember what their brands are doing, and they're gonna have more loyalty, and associates are gonna remember what you do.
Yeah, and I think that's where, being very transparent, and making sure that people really understand the situation, and you're communicating often and clearly, is vitally important during this time, especially as we talked about earlier, as things continue to change rapidly and daily. And so I think that that's been one of the, and being authentic, in the way you're delivering whatever information or news that you have to give to your associates. So I think that that's some things that have become really clear as a leader, through these times that we've been dealing with, especially over the past few months.
For sure.
Yeah. I think, from what I've heard from both of you, it's flexing that EQ muscle, right? Mm-hmm. It's being able to connect, communicate, to share, hey, I may not have all the answers, but we know this is an issue, and we're going to come up with that solution, and we'll get back to you with it. It's saying, hey, it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. And we'll make our way through it. And from all the partners that we've been exposed to, the leaders in the organizations that have been most successful have done exactly what you said, Susan. It's like being transparent, communicating often, and really flexing that EQ muscle.
And being authentic. Right. This is, if there's been any time for authentic leadership, this is the time. Yeah. And so being authentic in those communications becomes really important. Well, thank you, ladies. One of as we think about moving on to one of my next questions, I know we have seen in working with clients a lot of, obviously, a trend toward different ways that consumers are interacting with brands from a digital perspective, and as people were locked in their their homes, you know, not being able to physically go out to stores. Would love, Susan, for you to say a few things about how do you see the behavior that we're seeing, which again is migration to, there's a lot happening online. It's exploding the amount of transactions and the amount of commerce that's happening in a digital way, and in a way that has less friction in order to accommodate safety precautions. Would love your thoughts on what of that do you think is going to stick for the longer term?
Yeah, so I think you know, a few points in thinking about that. You know, when you look at just consumers in general, you know, the main things that are on their minds, you know, is really the healthcare, their health, right, and healthcare, the economy, and then remote work, right. So these are like when we've done some research and we look at, you know, what is the consumer doing and how are they reacting? They are the things on their minds. And when you look at, though, aside from how they're on their minds and how you tie to their actually like their habits, right? What you obviously see is a huge shift to any type of online interaction, whether it's shopping, ordering to pick up or delivery for restaurants, retailers, you see a huge, huge shift to that. And that is absolutely a trend that we do not see slowing down at any given point. It jumped like almost 60% from March until June, you know, the amount of people that increased their online consumption. With that, however, you know, one of the big things was grocery shopping, right? Nobody wanted to go into a grocery store. Everybody felt that was unsafe initially. And you know, online grocery shopping had not picked up very quickly. Like it was always a trend out there that everybody thought was going to take off. And it was ticking up, ticking up, ticking up. But obviously, once COVID hit, huge increase in online shopping for grocery. And however, wasn't always the best experience for people, right? What you couldn't get a delivery time, you couldn't get a pickup time. There wasn't items that were available, right? So what I think you're going to see is going to see online shopping for grocery, you know, continue. But I think you're also going to see people still want to be in the stores picking their own bananas and apples and things like that. They still want that control. So I think the shift right now, because we're in this crisis moment, is acute. And where we're going to probably settle back is somewhere in between the two. And I think it's, you know, really difficult for our customers, our businesses, right? Because a lot of them, like Lowe's, right, is invested in brick and mortar, right? It's a big part of their business. And however, customers like myself, we're going to choose how we want to interact. So I think when you look at where it's really going, as I said, it'll be somewhere in the middle. And we will want that choice. And I think there's an element of people wanting to get back to some normalcy. And quite frankly, it's not normal to sit on your computer and order everything in your life that you need. It's normal to have a little bit of both, right? Going into the store, into Lowe's or into a grocery store, picking what you want. So I really think that, as I said, digital shopping will continue. It's going to be very big, I think, obviously through the holiday season, whatever that is going to look like. And as hopefully the pandemic eases sometime into next year, there'll be more of a balance than it currently is. And our customers are trying to figure that out, and we're trying to help them with that as well.
Yeah, we see it will vary depending upon category of product and the nature of product. And the emotional connection with, I grew up in grocery retail, and so the emotional connection people very often have with food in particular, fresh fruit in particular, it'll continue to sort of vary, but digital commerce and having a really strong, important digital relationship with a brand, we've found has become more and more important.
Yeah, and the brands are struggling with that right now, right? Because due to the supply chain issues, especially within the CPG and the grocery world, people picked whatever was on the shelf, right? So toilet paper, cleaning products, you know, if you were brand loyal, you had to leave that. And now, you know, a lot of our brand customers are figuring out, how do I get that loyalty back? since some of the supply chain is much better within CPG, although I think it's different within some of the home improvement, right, as well. There's just continues to be supply chain depending on what supply chain issues, depending on what business you're in.
It's interesting though, because to your point, Susan, like two things. One, if you dabbled in digital before, that's not going to work, right? So the future is you're going to have to provide a hybrid model, because there'll be, you know, groups that are comfortable with the risk that may happen, you know, as they're mingling pre-vaccine and post-vaccine, whole different ballgame, right? And then there'll be, you know, groups that aren't. And so, you know, for us, our network of executive women, you know, probably 90% of what we were doing was face-to-face.
Right.
So within a matter of weeks, we had to flip to the virtual world. And so other business models that have had to do that, I hope are seeing that uptick as we have. Because the second point being, people draw energy from other people. And so, you know, if you have the physical locations, you can make that happen for those that do choose and are comfortable to go out. But if you don't, you've got to create that experience online somehow. And so it's, you can no longer afford to dabble. You've got to be, you know, an omni-channel brand.
Yeah, and we always like to, we're referring it to a commerce strategy, right? It's not e-com, it's not in-store, it's commerce at this point, right? So, yeah, and as leading a sales team, we're trying to figure out, you know, how to engage our customers that we can't walk in and shake their hands, you know, virtually, and making sure they're comfortable with that as well. So,
it'll be challenging.
Yeah.
Creating impact. And so, speaking of hybrid models, you know, as you think about, Sarah, you just mentioned this, and I think Janice and Susan have both mentioned this, where people are working. So the workplace of my workforce workplace, my little future of work triangle. When you think about how we've had to adjust, for those of us who don't reside in stores, distribution centers, or factories, in particular in retail and consumer products, we've gone virtual, and we have this remote working relationship. And lots of companies, many companies, as we know, have made pretty big announcements about you never need to come back to work, or we're not planning to send anybody to buildings. A lot of companies on the West Coast, in particular, tech-run companies, they've made pretty early and pretty broad announcements about how they're going to give people a lot of flexibility and give people a lot of choice. And then, of course, as we move into the fall, and with the 13,000 school districts that exist in the country, there are 13,000 different ways that people are going back to school, online or physically.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? And Susan, we'll look to you again here. What are your thoughts on how is the model going to work? Like, as we think about, how do you think the workforce is going to, you know, sort of evolve, or are companies' decisions for where the workforce is going to be, whether it's digitally connected, physically connected, you know, more of one or a little bit of both? How do you see that trending through the fall as we move into next year? And what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I know particularly for our company and a lot of other companies, I think everybody's on hold to a certain degree as to everybody rushing back, you know, into offices, you know, due to COVID. Just a lot to think about, right? And making sure there's a safe environment for people to return to, they're comfortable. So, you know, we have no date that we have settled onto. It's kind of open-ended, like I think most companies are, as to when we'll go back into the office. I think when you look at the hybrid model, right, you know, there's an element, particularly with our remote workers, of, you know, so much online interaction right now, you know, 10 hours a day just looking at your computer and talking online. And you know, there's a fatiguing. I feel like, you know, we came out, the pandemic happened. We were so worried about everybody being remote and connecting. We ended up, you know, over rotating to having all these meetings online, right, and constantly connecting, to now I think we're trying to, we figured out that this is the new normal, you know, for the time being. And so now we're trying to put in some, you know, I particularly have been trying to put into some placeholders so that people can actually not be tethered to a video conference, you know, all day, in order to feel like they're working, and have created hours of no internal calls and things like that, so that people can have some flexibility, you know, through their day that they don't have, since there was such a pivot to video conferencing. So I think, you know, the other thing is, we've had to look at decisions of leases coming up on business buildings and things like that. You know, right now I have decided not to, you know, re-up on leases on some sales offices and things like that, and to regroup as we understand what's going to happen as we get out of this pandemic, with the thinking that most likely we'll end up with more flexible workspaces, so that people can have the freedom to come into an office and connect when they need to, because it's not great for everyone to work at home, you know, especially if you have children, or, you know, it's just not always the most, you know, stress-free environment. So then they'll have the flexibility, I see in the future, to be able, you know, to come into an office because they want to have an ability for everybody to get together, because there is something to be said for that opportunity to act and think and communicate and share ideas. So that's where I think we're going to end up into much more flexible workspace, much more flexible environment, and people will have that opportunity to decide how they want to engage and when they want to engage. And I think that that's what's going to really stick, you know, particularly not just for us, but in many organizations, you know, as this evolves and we come out of the pandemic.
Absolutely. And Janice and Sarah, what are your thoughts on the topic of how people will work?
I would just say, I think that the hybrid approach is definitely very, very much a part of our future. I also think that we're looking at this thing a little bit more intentional about which roles actually make sense, right? So we're really kind of going through a very concerted effort to really look at what is the job, what is the work, is it more feasible for that to be done on site or off site? Because, you know, when we built facilities or leased space, as Susan was saying, you know, we built that or planned for that with a certain number of resources. Mm-hmm. So we've spent time with our leaders asking them, you know, what roles do you have? We didn't talk about people. People came back to this story in terms of, hey, Janice doesn't have internet at home. And so she needs to be in the office. She mm-hmm. She doesn't have that at home. But for the most part, we looked at it by job. And then we started to really look at what is the normal accommodations we have at the office that need to change, from elevators to spacing to all this stuff. So we looked at all these things inside the office, and we also knew, based on social distancing, how many people we could actually fit. I mean, that was just a numerical analysis that, based on social distancing requirement by the CDC, we can only fit so many in our spaces today. So our facilities team has done an excellent job at really kind of reassessing our footprint. We've got a plan in terms of, if we've got to retrofit the space, we know what we're going to do, how we would do that, how much it would cost, how long it would take. So just being very thoughtful on this plan. But I do think the most important thing is, I agree so much with what you said, Susan, in terms of our associates, when they went home and they got so focused on delivering and working, that they need to separate from work. We're encouraging them to take vacations. I know you can't travel around the world right now. You cannot go to all these wonderful places you may have normally done, but you need a mental break. And so we've been really pressing on, and I've been asking for, I want to see the data that says who's going, people are starting, percentages should start to rise on vacation, you know, recordings, because I want people to take that. It's so important. It's so important, because you can only give what you have. And if you're not refueled, then you don't have that to give. I'll tell you one really quick story about mental health. So we made available all of our benefits to our associates, whether they are on our benefits plan or not, certain ones like telemed and Calm, which is really good for mental health. But we had an associate that just joined our company, I think probably within the last month. Some reason, I don't know the details, but she lost her spouse just before deciding to come back to work. And she came back to work for us, and she landed on our SharePoint site around how to manage through COVID. And she found all the mental health resources, and she just sent me a personal email to just say thank you. I just want you to know I'm new here. I haven't been in the workforce in a while, lost my husband, but I just want you to know that these resources are so helpful. And so that just tells me all the things that we've been trying to make sure we're thinking about. We don't have it all right, but just trying to make sure our associates are staying healthy mentally, because you'll stay at that computer 24/7 if you just don't have any reason to break.
Yeah.
And then also just being flexible and respectful, that you're now in people's homes.
Yeah.
You see their work environment. You may see their bedroom, their bed from the background of their video conference, you know, and just being respectful of those boundaries that you've now been invited into their home, because that's how they have to operate, right? And so flexible and being patient, you know, is really important. Children are home, many of them, and how does these parents actually deliver a message and do a presentation? You know, we're not on the news every day, but I mean, we all know the story about the news anchor that was doing their session, and their child comes and interrupts. So it's real. We have to be more flexible and open and considerate.
Yeah, to that point, Janice, we've been trying to collect, you know, best practices from all of our partners to share with all of our other members about, okay, we're heading back to school, and to, you know, to Kimberly's point, there's like 13,000 different approaches. You know, some may be starting in person, some may be hybrid, some may be fully remote. But I read this stat that 60% of all families at home have no childcare.
Yeah.
So they, you know, they had counted on school, right? The in-person school model as childcare for them. And now they've moved back, and you've got, you know, dual working, you know, parents who are juggling that. That to me, 60% of all families have no childcare. So imagine, right? Like trying to navigate, you know, all the work that you have to do on top of the family. Janice, what is your approach going to be at Lowe's in terms of, you know, incorporating that, not only from the store perspective, but then from the HQ perspective?
Yeah, so we are actually, we did a survey. We did focus groups and really kind of understood what do our associates need to help during this time, especially with childcare. And many of them said, listen, I want to work. I need to work. I want to continue to work. I just need some flexibility. So how do you help me be able to manage my hours? I still want to get my hours in. I may not be able to do it in the normal flow that I used to if I work these certain days at these certain hours. So we're working really diligently on how to help that be automated. So if I have to not have childcare tomorrow, I found out this afternoon, letting my boss know I can't do that, but also being able to find out where is another location or a store that I could actually go and make up some hours because they have some flexibility. So we're trying to think through those components. And one other thing I would just give a shout out that we just really need to rally around is a lot of our benefits programs today that where people put money away for childcare to get reimbursed for childcare, those funds tend to only go to certified care, right? And a lot of those certified care centers aren't open,
Right.
right?
Right.
And a lot of people aren't comfortable sending their child there, but they cannot use those funds to go give it to grandma or to Aunt Lucy or Uncle Joe that could actually be available to sit with my child because I'm not comfortable even sending them there. So we need legislation to kind of relax a little bit here.
Absolutely.
That allows that money to go into the hands of real caregivers that look different than what we have traditionally had. So I just wanted to give a little shout out that we can continue to look for legislation opportunities to push that forward. Would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how, speaking of childcare, what's your perspective on? And by the way, we talk about the current situation. We talk about it in terms of living at work.
Yeah.
Living at work,
Right.
and when, you know, and I have 2 dogs that come in and they fight, and when something happens in the background, what we try to do is bring your whole authentic self. I love it. I love it. Have your toddler in your lap. This is awesome. Trying to help people feel like that's the new normal. But would love to get your perspective on, you know, how this has inadvertently impacted women in particular, this particular situation, especially as it pertains to back to school and some of the, you know, the topic of childcare, you know, our perspective is that, you know, our women, our female practitioners which still have a tendency to provide a lot of care and homeschooling and those sorts of things for their kids, are particularly hard hit by trying to figure out this juggling act. Would love to get, you know, get that perspective. Maybe Janice, if you could start off.
Sure.
It sounds like you're trying to find new and different ways to provide support for your employees around
Yeah,
this.
so I will tell you the bigger things that we talked about is not only in the field for flexible schedules, but also being flexible with meetings and adjusting for those needs, even for those people that are working remote. The other thing I will give you is we host an annual Women's Leadership Summit, and we bring in all of our field and women and our corporate women together to really kind of galvanize around our female women's strategy. And we're doing that program virtually this year. And one of the topics on there is about the impact of women in this environment, working mothers. And so one of the things that's very, very clear is because of what you said, it's true, the burden is heavier, tends to be heavier on women. I'm not saying that there's not wonderful fathers that are out there that are stay at home and so forth, but the burden tends to land more on the mother and who also has a job. So our number one thing is we're looking at opportunities where it may make sense that you job share for a little bit. We've had some requests that came in that says, I'd like to change my job in time. Can I do that? You know, and so these are case by cases, but this is the flexibility that we need managers to be able to take on and work with their HR team and look at the business need and solve for that. But I do believe that that's number one. Our Women's Business Resource Group, I believe, will spend a lot of good time on being share thoughts and perspectives and empathize and really come up with solutions we can way more to them and to our women around, even in the corporate offices that are working remote.
That's great. It sounds like there's a lot of really cool things going on at Lowe's. So thank you for sharing that. Susan and Sarah, would love to get your perspective also on this topic, as it is a big topic. I know I spend a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great solutions, right? I mean, but what I worry about is, you know, really how this is going to position, you know, women in the workplace in the long run, right? Because when you do look at studies, there's a lot of women that have had to make the choice to leave the workplace right now, to take the pause of their career, or because they can't find a pod, they don't have flexibility, they don't have someone, you know, near them that can watch their children. I personally lost a really great sales person because, you know, had their children in daycare, and someone came down with COVID, and she just decided that, you know, she just wasn't willing to risk her children's health, right? And didn't have other alternatives. And so, you know, I think we do need to keep our eye on this. This could be critically difficult for women in the workforce to have to make the decision. We're already seeing drops in all levels, whether you're a professional or an essential worker, of women leaving due to the fact that they are choosing, which is a great choice, right, to take care of their families instead of working. So I think that this is a big deal, that we've got to really give them resources and help to stay in the workplace, or we're going to set ourselves back of all the great work that everyone's done, and we still got a lot of work to do. So I think this will continue to emerge as something, and I know for us at Valassis, you know, a lot of resources, a lot of support, and flexibility is key to allowing people to do what they need to do, women or men, but particularly women, so we don't lose, you know, a lot of the good talent we have in the organization.
It's a really good point, because when I think about when we started, I know when we started new, and some of the aspirations we had about trying to get women into C-suite positions, onto boards, in 20 years, how difficult it's been to, I keep thinking about a needle. I think about it as sort of a gauge, how difficult it's been to try to move that needle. How much time, effort, and lifting it's taken, and now given some of the unique challenges that women have, the importance, to your point, Susan, of really doubling down and watching that, because we don't want to slide back, and with what progress we've made with women, what progress we made particularly with women of color, which we need to continue to push that needle. We just don't want to slip back.
I think the other one, I just want to add one other quick point here, Kimberly. I think some of this is with the environment we're in, is there still a lot of great talent that still has either support to be able to continue to work in ways that were, and so I think leaning into that as well, and not letting the subject off the table, keeping it on the table, continuing to advance your strategies around diversity and women, and making sure that we don't lose sight of it. I think, to go to Susan's point, is how do we recognize it's existing and it set us back, but how do we not leave it off the agenda and constantly talk about it, constantly understand where women are, what do you need, how can we continue to support your success, and making it a priority be very, very important to keep it in front and not have to look back and say, boy, we missed that.
Well,
Keep it in front of
particularly the young, there tend to be our younger talent, right, that are dealing with the childcare issues, and they're our future talent. Then that is, that's so vital to, continuing this journey. So definitely something we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Any other last words to add, Sarah, before I turn it back to Edie? I know we're coming up around time, so I just want to be respectful of our time boundaries.
Yeah, no, and what I would just add to what Susan and Janice so eloquently said was, it's imperative that the C-suite leaders in our organizations take that responsibility for identifying these new creative and flexible and innovative approaches to how they can support their leaders, their female leaders. And, as we all shared, they are bearing the burden of this collision of, life and family meet work under one roof. And like Susan said, the lion's share of the people that have been quitting because of all of this have been women, because they haven't had that support infrastructure in play. And, so glad to hear that, both Valassis and Lowe's are trying to be creative, trying to be adaptable, flexible, because we know the old model isn't going to work. So it's finding that new model. And like Janice said, it's got to be a consistent imperative and priority for our organizations.
And watching the evolution of it, because it'll continue to change quite a bit as we move through.
Oh, indeed.
So fabulous to spend this panel time with you ladies, and it's been truly special. So thank you for all your input, and I want to turn it back over to Edie.
Well, all of us want to thank you, and to Kimberly, and to Janice, and to Susan, and to you, Sarah, for really looking at the dynamic, strident changes, as you said, in work and the workforce, in the workplace, and in the home space. And what you've said about belonging and engagement, and what you've said about technology shifts and the agility that's needed, and to bring value adds, what it means for women of color, what it means for the have-nots, of what you've focused on, the respectful and flexible, but the change. But as you just said, 60% of families that have no childcare, what this means as we work together in these times, as you said, not to fall back, but to advance as we uplift women, and especially women of color in these times, to really advance, because we know the talent is there and we're grateful. So Lorena Fembrace, thank you for organizing these call. Thank you for New as a partner. Do join us on August 26th. We're gonna have several CEOs on our next CEO call, and our summit October 1st and 2nd. And do keep giving good news about women that are advancing as CEOs in the C-suite, on corporate boards, but the movement of women of color of as we can celebrate in these days, and to make sure that we are so respectful of those in need. Thank you so much to New. We are just thrilled to have you as a partner. You've taught us so much about the changing workforce and workplace and the home marketplace to support one another. God bless.